This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Egypt becomes the latest country to receive COVID-19 vaccines made by China's Sinopharm. South Africa's Health Ministry confirms a second wave of COVID-19 infections. And we take a look at the deepening political crisis in the DRC as President Tshisekedi seeks to scrap the ruling coalition. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment, but first, here's Ramah Nyang with the day's business headlines. Ramah.
That's right, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Italy's oil firm Eni strikes a deal to reopen Egypt's liquid natural gas plant. And the Bank of England is warning of post-Brexit financial services disruption. We'll have the details on those stories and plenty more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. Egypt has received its first batch of a COVID-19 vaccine made by Chinese pharmaceutical company Sinopharm. Egypt got the consignment on Thursday night. Adil Mahrouri has more details.
Egyptian Health Minister Hala Zaid and Chinese Cairo Liao Lixiang patiently waited for some special cargo at the Cairo International Airport. The flight coming from UAE was carrying hope on board, a consignment of Egypt's first COVID-19 vaccines.
We have received the first shipment of the COVID-19 vaccine. This is the first of the air freight supplying us with a vaccine. It's a historic day. We work continuously to guarantee the influx of the vaccine to the Egyptian people. That is thanks to God and thanks to the deep friendly relations between us, the Emirati people and the Chinese people.
The vaccines have been manufactured by China's Sinopharm. The company has been collaborating with the UAE and Egypt in conducting phase 3 of human clinical trials. Authorities in the UAE approved the Chinese vaccine in the United Arab Emirates, while those in Egypt gave it the green light for emergency use in the country. The vaccine is said to be 96% effective and prevents medium to critical COVID-19 symptoms by 100%.
Collaboration between mankind is to face common threats like the COVID-19 pandemic. I am happy to witness this moment. The arrival of the Chinese vaccines from the UAE to Egypt shows that China is always keen on positive cooperation when it comes to the vaccine, whether it's through the development, the production, or fair distribution.
Egypt has so far received 50,000 vaccines. The country will need many more, but this shipment be very effective in helping its medical staff combat the second wave. The first batch will be given to those facing the highest risk of infection, with priority given to doctors curing COVID-19 patients. Egypt has become the first African country to receive COVID-19 vaccines. The country is expecting more from China and other producers. All vaccines will be distributed for Egyptian citizens for free. Adil Mahrouri, CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has appealed to the global community to assist African countries with COVID-19 vaccines. It also says the continent must prepare itself for quickly and safely distributing vaccines across its member states. Here is CGTN's Gerum Chala with more on that story.
Africa is considering at least 3 COVID-19 vaccine candidates to be used across the continent. They include the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, but the continent also faces the challenge of putting together proper cold storage chains for distribution of vaccines across member states.
The Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine require stringent storage conditions that are minus 20 and minus 70. That by itself becomes a challenge in the supply chain distribution. But it doesn't stop us from establishing vaccination points in capital cities, okay, and start with that. I think the key thing is that we need to start, I think, rather than get ourselves completely grounded.
Many worry Africa might lag behind when it comes to getting COVID-19 vaccines on time. The Africa CDC says this can also become a moral issue.
The world watches Africa not receiving vaccines and see the global north getting the vaccines. I think that would really create a moral issue. I think that there's no word to describe that. I mean, the real word is we get ourselves into a moral dilemma.
The African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says it's time the world fulfills the promises of solidarity with the continent by helping Africans get vaccines as soon as possible.
In order to position Africa to reintegrate into the global economy, which requires movement of people, the vaccines become so central. Serves as a pivotal moment in the history of our continent where without access to these vaccines in a timely fashion and equitable manner, we will be, our whole developmental process will be challenged. So, I mean, that is an appeal that the whole discourse around equity, ethics, cooperation, solidarity that has characterized this pandemic and call to action should be implemented now.
Currently, 2.3 million coronavirus cases have been reported across Africa. That is a 4.5% of reported across the world. Africa also has an 89% total recovery rate. About 1.9 million people out of the 2.3 million who were infected have already recovered. Unfortunately, people continue losing their lives in Africa due to the COVID-19 pandemic. 54,000 people have died so far here. Some say that figure is not that bad when compared to the 1.5 million people that were recorded globally. Grumtara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
South Africa's health ministry says the country is now experiencing a second wave of COVID-19 infections. The Western Cape has been identified as one of the regions behind the new spike in coronavirus cases. Authorities there are concerned as the rising cases have put more pressure on public healthcare facilities. CGTN.
The Western Cape has been deemed a COVID-19 hotspot due to a major spike in infections. This has left both the national and provincial governments worried. Out of more than 836,000 people who have been infected nationally, 30% are from the Western Cape. The daily infection rate has also surpassed over 8,000 in just 24 hours. Now authorities believe that a second COVID-19 wave has arrived, and Cape Town begins.
The Western Cape is having a very dramatic resurgence in cases. And at the moment, it's driven largely by an outbreak and resurgence in the Garden Route, but in fact also virtually the metropole. So, for example, we have seen our active cases at the moment rise to over 11,000 active cases.
Experts believe that a number of factors led to this latest rise in infections, including super spreader events that often lead to increased community spread. Non-compliance with COVID-19 safety regulations has also worsened the situation. Now the healthcare system is beginning to feel the effects of a rapidly increasing infection rate.
At the end of September, we were seeing under 500 cases in public and private in the Western Cape. At the moment, we are sitting just over 1,200 people in hospitals in public and private. And that is throughout the province as well, where we're seeing that increase in cases in hospitalizations as well.
The government is particularly concerned about the prevalence and transmission of COVID-19 among teenagers. It's an issue some teenagers feel strongly about.
It's known that coronavirus might not affect us as much as it will affect our vulnerable elders at home. We are just carriers. And then as carriers, we go to events. I feel like teenagers should just take a stand.
We have to think of our families. But also, I feel like teenagers are tired of staying at home because we've been at home since March. But that doesn't give them the right to not think about other people.
But I am concerned that we'll get another lockdown and it will lead to lots of unemployment and people will suffer from job loss and that sort of thing. That's the main thing I'm concerned about, the economic aspect.
Authorities hope to curb the resurgence of the virus through behavioral change. They want to do this by insisting on mask wearing, social distancing and hand sanitization. The law enforcement agencies will also be roped in to drive home that important public health message. Authorities say they're also concerned about the role alcohol is playing in pressuring the healthcare system, because patients admitted for alcohol-related trauma are competing for beds with patients admitted for COVID-19. Now that the festive season is getting underway, the situation is likely to be compounded, putting even further pressure on the already strained healthcare facilities. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
In Kenya, scientists at the Kenya Medical Research Institute have been studying the spread of the coronavirus in the country. The team, led by Dr. Ochola Oyer, say their research has shown that half the Kenyan population may have contracted the virus. They attribute the difference between that estimate and the officially released case numbers could be due to lack of widespread testing. Here's CGTN's Wanja Mungai.
At the Kenya Medical Research Institute, scientists have been busy. They are carrying out a study to determine the extent to which the coronavirus has spread in Kenya. Official COVID-19 numbers published by the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention indicate about 89,000 infections so far. The researchers are saying there's a possibility more people have caught the virus.
What we've been able to, we've been receiving for the COVID-19 testing, because we support the 6 coastal counties in Kenya, was that a large proportion of the individuals early on in the pandemic were asymptomatic, which means they have virus but don't show any clinical signs such as coughing or sneezing, or the standard signs that we know of. That means they're roaming around in the population with virus, but not being sick, and they're not aware that they have the virus. So that obviously you're able to some extent, if you measure the blood sample, you can also pick that up, that they may have been, there are 2 ways. You may have been asymptomatic and have generated antibodies to that. You may have been symptomatic, or you may simply have been exposed to somebody who was asymptomatic or symptomatic and still have generated an immune response to being exposed to the virus.
Kenya, which recorded its first case in March, ranks among the highly infected countries in Africa by COVID-19. According to World Health Organization index, the East African country comes number 6 after South Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt and Ethiopia. Africa as a whole has 2.3 million infection cases, with 1.9 recoveries and about 53,000 deaths. Kenya constitutes about 4% of those infections. Dr. Ochola says the few cases are as a result of the strict measures imposed at the onset of the pandemic. Also, a lack of enough PCR tests which detect the genetic information of the virus and show if one is actively infected.
The antibody test looks at those people who have been infected in the past 2 weeks or more, and it might actually be understating, because not everybody who gets infected develops antibodies. So we can extrapolate to say that the infection rate or the number of people who have been infected in the Kenyan society is actually much higher as at April to June. Subsequent data by Cambridge, which was published in August but yet to be published in peer-reviewed journals, shows that between 34 to 41% of individuals are actually already infected. So perhaps by now, more than 50% of people have been infected.
The study, however, has not determined if the presence of antibodies in a recovered person guarantees immunity. Wanjamungai, CGTN.
Lawmakers in the Democratic Republic of Congo have removed the Speaker of Parliament from office. Janine Mabunda was removed in a vote that went well into the night on Thursday. Her removal has been hailed as a major victory for President Felix Tshisekedi, who is on a mission to assert his authority after breaking up the ruling coalition that he jointly led with former President Joseph Kabila. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
DRC Speaker Janine Mabunda was voted out of office by MPs who accused her of violating the Constitution and parliamentary rules. She's been in office for 1 year and 7 months. Hundreds of supporters of President Tshisekedi gathered outside Parliament to follow the proceedings. Clashes broke out between the police and some of the supporters who tried to force their way into Parliament.
We mothers are saying enough is enough. Janine Mabunda has really ashamed us by the way she led affairs in Parliament. We want her to leave.
This lady has already been removed from office. Let her go back home enter her kitchen and cook food. She's not fit to lead our parliament.
Her ouster comes 4 days after President Tshisekedi announced an end of the ruling coalition that's been beset by internal wrangling. The motion to remove the Speaker of Parliament, Janine Mabunda, is part of a bigger power struggle between President Felix Tshisekedi and his predecessor, Joseph Kabila. Mabunda is an ally of Kabila and has been accused of frustrating the president's efforts to push reforms through Parliament. Last year, President Tshisekedi signed a power-sharing deal with his predecessor, Joseph Kabila, after failing to get a majority in Parliament. But their FCC cash coalition has been rocked by differences over the appointment of judges and the management of other government institutions.
When you go to our parliament, you'll find that most of the MPs belong to the FCC alliance of Joseph Kabila. President Tshisekedi believes the only way he can succeed to make reforms in the country is by removing the speaker who is allied to Kabila. Once he does so, he'll be able to remove the prime minister who is also from Kabila's side.
On Tuesday, clashes broke out between MPs allied to President Tshisekedi and their rivals from Joseph Kabila's camp after the petition to remove the speaker was filed. The head of the UN peacekeeping mission in the DRC condemned the violence and urged the leaders to resolve their differences peacefully. The DRC witnessed its first peaceful handover of power last year after a long delayed election, but the breakup of the country's ruling coalition has caused a deeper crisis that's threatening to return the country to chaos. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Political tension mounts in Sudan over newly formed council. And the President of the European Union says the Brexit trade negotiators remain divided on fundamental issues.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Political tension is mounting in Sudan over a new council formed by the head of the Sovereign Council, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. He issued a decree to form a new council, which civilian representatives believe could reduce their authority. Here's CGTN's Adel Mahroui with that story.
Tension has heightened between the military and civilian powers in Sudan. Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has formed the Transitional Partners Council, or TPC in short. It comprises 5 military leaders, including himself, Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok, 13 members from the Forces of Freedom and Change, and 5 from the Sudanese Revolutionary Front. Right after Burhan's decree to form the TPC, the Sudanese Prime Minister's office and most civilian and rebel groups rejected it. They warned that it will undermine the Legislative Council, a body that should have been formed over a year ago, but which has never seen the light.
This political dispute could magnify. It could spark unprecedented tension, but it will get resolved in the end. I believe that regional influences are very effective in Sudan. All regional and international powers want a stable Sudan. So if domestic politics ignited, the world would move quickly to help in ending these differences.
Currently, though, the political rift in Sudan only appears to be gaining momentum. Critics are concerned about the ambiguous phrasing of the Transitional Partners Council's mission. And it's a new obstacle in the list of disputes between civilians and the Sudanese army generals that has been ongoing for 1 year now and has so far delayed the transition in Sudan by 14 months. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
In Morocco, two announcements by the U.S. are making headlines. First, Washington has recognized Morocco's sovereignty over the Western Sahara. This came following a call between U.S. President Donald Trump and Moroccan King Mohammed VI. The Polisario Front, which fought Morocco for independence of Western Sahara, condemned President Trump's statement. Since the 1970s, the region has witnessed conflict and deadlock. Morocco also announced the normalization of ties with Israel. It has become the fourth Arab state since August to do so.
At the same time, His Majesty announced to the President that Morocco will take concrete steps to resume a relationship with Israel on several levels, through, of course, the overflight and landings of direct flights, on the basis taking into account the fact that Morocco has a large Moroccan Jewish community living in Israel and has kept a strong link with Morocco, which comes every year to celebrate religious and other festivities and family.
Morocco had relations with Israel before. Jewish Moroccans come to the city of Essaouira to celebrate their holidays freely and undisturbed because they are Moroccans. For me, it is normal that there is a normalization of relations between Morocco and Israel.
The recognition must be effective through projects, the opening of an American embassy, and by supporting Morocco's strategy in the major projects of the region at the economic or political level.
Well, let's now head to Europe, where the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, says the Brexit trade negotiators remain divided on fundamental issues. A possible no-deal Brexit is now just weeks away.
Positions remain apart on fundamental issues. On the level playing field, we have repeatedly made clear to our UK partners that the principle of fair competition is a precondition to privileged access to the EU market. It is the largest single market in the world, and it is only fair that competitors to our own enterprises face the same conditions on our own market.
Von der Leyen was speaking at a joint news conference in Brussels with German Chancellor Angela Merkel and European Council Chief Charles Michel. She said the two sides would decide on Sunday whether they have conditions for an agreement or not. A major point of disagreement is fishing rights. Von der Leyen said the European Union understands that Britain wants control of its waters, but she said London must understand the legitimate expectations of EU fishing fleets. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has commented on the progress of talks. He says a no-deal Brexit is looking more and more probable.
We're hopeful that progress can be made, but I've got to tell you that from where I stand now, here in Blythe, it's looking, you know, very, very likely that we'll have to go for a solution that I think would be, you know, wonderful for the UK. We'd be able to do exactly what we want from January the 1st. Obviously, it would be different from what we'd set out to achieve, but I've no doubt that this country can get ready and, as I say, come out on world trade terms.
The European Union says it now aims to cut greenhouse emissions by at least 55% by 2030. This new increased target will replace the bloc's previous goal of 40% by the same year. European Council President Charles Michel said EU leaders reached the deal following tough all-night talks at a climate summit. The meeting dragged out due to discussions on how the cost of the effort should be shared across member countries. Coal-dependent Poland, in particular, was pressing for specific conditions to be attached to the agreement. If the reduction is reached, it would put the EU on track to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Now, 5 years since the signing of the Paris Agreement, several African countries have tried to play their part in tackling climate change by implementing small-scale interventions. However, a lot more still needs to be done. Earlier, we spoke to Chukwu Okereke, a professor of global environmental and climate governance, on this subject.
One of the most outstanding impacts of climate change is in the area of agriculture and food production. You see, because of Africa's location very close to the equator and being a tropical continent, Africa's temperature has been rising faster than the global mean temperature. And the consequence of this is that there has been a huge variation in rainfall pattern, and most parts of Africa have been experiencing shorter periods of rainfall and longer periods of dry season. The consequence of this has been a lot of drought and a lot of poor performance of our agricultural outputs. Another main area, but is the incidence of extreme weather events. And the third big area is through flooding. Africa is experiencing a lot of flooding, and that is resulting in massive displacement of people. In some cases, the entire states or communities have been sacked by flooding. And this also has resulted in serious socioeconomic consequences for many, many countries and communities across Africa. There are a range of different things that should be done. Number one, African countries need to fully understand the nature of impacts that are currently being experienced and the future projected impact. This means investing heavily in science, in climate modeling, climate prediction, to be able to understand the current and future dimensions of impact. So we need planning not only at national level, but also at subnational and local levels. And quite frankly, also, Africa needs to intensify their advocacy to attract finance, technology, and capacity building resources from the developed countries to enable them to implement their plan.
Well, let's now go to Ramah Nyang for a look at the day's business news. Ramah.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. Italy's Eni has struck a deal to reopen an LNG plant in Egypt. And the Bank of England is warning of post-Brexit financial services disruption. We'll have the details when we come back.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor, to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market. It's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in North Africa. A long-standing dispute between the Egyptian government on one hand and an Italian-Spanish energy consortium has been resolved, allowing the reopening of an Egyptian natural gas liquefaction plant after being closed for 8 years. Now, that move followed a protracted dispute between Union Fenosa Gas, which is a coalition of Italy's Eni, and a Spanish energy company. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
The deal that has been finally struck is good news for the natural gas industry in Egypt. The Damietta liquefaction plant, one of two in Egypt, has been shut down since 2012 due to the volatility and unrest that followed the 2011 uprising. UFG, a partnership of Italian oil giant Eni and Spain's Naturgy, had a majority stake in the plant. They went to court in 2014 for a $2 billion compensation from the Egyptian government.
The Damietta plant has a liquefaction unit that produces 5 million tons of gas every year and that has lost revenue for years. This situation harmed Naturgy and Union Fenosa Gas financially, and that's why they sought international arbitration for contract violation and to make up for the huge losses.
The new deal entails that Eni and the Egyptian government split ownership of the LNG plant. In return for dropping the case, Naturgy will exit Egypt, taking $600 million and several UFG assets as compensation. The Damietta facility is vital for the North African country's ambitions to become a natural gas hub in the East Mediterranean.
First, Egypt will not need to import liquefied gas anymore, so it will save about $120 million a month from its budget. When the plant works on full capacity, it will create a badly needed hard currency income by exporting to the East Mediterranean and Europe. Also, when operational, the plant will create employment opportunities and help improve living conditions in the surrounding Damietta area.
The Damietta LNG plant is expected to reopen in the first quarter of 2021, consolidating Egypt's position as a main gas producer and exporter in the region. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Tunisia, in the meantime, has extended a nighttime curfew until the end of the year in a bid to tackle a rise in COVID-19 cases. But this is coming amid growing discontent and anti-government protests in the North African state. Authorities have decided to keep the curfew from 8 p.m. to 5 in the morning, pretty much in 24 governorates every day of the week. Here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi with this report.
The decision to extend the nighttime curfew was approved by the Scientific Committee at the Ministry of Health and the COVID-19 Task Force. Authorities insist that masks remain mandatory in all open spaces.
It is scientifically proven that wearing the face mask reduces the percentage of viruses up to 90%. One does not wear the mask 100% the whole day. One can take it off to breathe or drink, or if there's no one around. There is the asymptomatic, the symptomatic and the dangerous form of this disease. The mask, as well as social distancing, saves lives and limits the form of infection.
The government announced that cafes may remain open until 7 p.m. but must remove their chairs from 4 p.m. onwards, while shisha pipes remain banned in all shisha bars and cafes. Thousands of cafe owners and workers protested in many cities to denounce the recent decisions, which they say will further deepen the economic crisis.
We don't accept the decision to remove the chairs and tables and to close at night. Consumers come to cafes to sit and discuss. Our situation is difficult. We have unpaid bills and rents for several months. Hundreds of cafes have shut down forever. This is an arbitrary decision.
The coronavirus is dangerous, but unemployment is deadlier. The government prevents us from working without offering any alternative or concrete financial aid. This is unacceptable.
The Tunisian Confederation of Industry revealed that 80% of restaurants shut down indefinitely due to the pandemic. Consequently, many related economic sectors were affected.
We can no longer support this situation. It's catastrophic. Many professionals are impacted because restaurants work with butchers, vegetable merchants and bakers. Many economic sectors depend on restaurants and cafes.
The National Committee to Combat Coronavirus also approved the decision to limit to 30 the number of people allowed to attend private events, including funeral ceremonies and marriages. The Tunisian government has reported an increase in the number of protests and sit-ins since the outbreak of the second wave of the pandemic in September. Analysts maintain that the current economic situation could plunge the country into an unprecedented social and political crisis. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
On to matters further afield now. The Bank of England said today that British banks remained resilient in the face of Brexit. The British Central Bank says that most risks to the UK's financial stability have been mitigated thanks to extensive preparations by the private sector and public authorities too. But it did say that some market volatility to EU-based clients could arise at the end of the transition period, which is at the end of this month. The BOE says its optimism in British banks is based on the fact that the institutions are capable of absorbing at least £200 billion in credit losses. British banks already took a hit of about £20 billion in credit losses just this year as a result of the economic damage inflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Over in Asia, China's exports jumped over 20% in dollar terms in the month of November. For the first time, the country has also become the largest source of imports for the United Kingdom. But for exporters in China, this pandemic means meeting demand has not been easy. CGTN's Gao Ang paid a visit to one warehouse and logistics firm to explore the challenges that exporters in China are facing.
Christmas is just around the corner. But you may be wondering why festive trees and decorations are taking a little longer to arrive on your doorstep.
Among all the stuff here, there could be your Christmas tree or decorations. But instead of being delivered to your home in New York or Paris, they are now piling up in a warehouse in Shanghai. So why is this?
The reasons are actually quite simple. It all comes down to containers being in short supply. There were over 20,000 containers in stock at this warehouse in November last year, but the number has been reduced to about 6,000 the same period this year.
This area used to be piled high with containers, but now about 100,000 square meters of the site stands empty.
As a result, shipping costs are rising. It currently costs over $5,000 to ship a container from China to the UK, up 300% from March.
Shipping companies can't keep up with so many orders in such a short space of time, so they increase shipping costs to maintain transportation capacity. But even so, demand for China's exports remain very high.
But for Chinese exporters, higher shipping fees are only one of the obstacles. China's yuan strengthened to 6.5 against the US dollar in November from about 7 in May.
And this is quite significant. If you're an exporter and if you signed a $1 million contract in August, and when you deliver those products in November, actually it will incur a loss of 500,000 RMB just because of the yuan appreciation.
Fast rising prices on raw materials are also putting extra pressure on profits.
Before they get the money from the buyers in foreign markets, there needs to be some sort of liquidity injection, either from the government or from financial platforms.
For those also affected by trade imbalances, such as international logistic firms, shifting focus to the domestic market is one of their key strategies.
We are ready to concentrate on domestic circulation. We have been researching and working to promote the domestic logistics service of China's self-made products in many areas across the country.
Experts say the lack of containers will last into March next year and possibly longer. And as Christmas draws near, don't be too anxious if your goods don't arrive. After all, the holiday season is about more than just a tree. Gang, CGTN, Shanghai.
After a weeks-long blockade by Hungary and Poland, EU leaders have agreed on a much-needed stimulus package. Now, it is hoped that this will help to bring the bloc back from the edge of an economic cliff. But as CGTN's Tony Waterman now reports from Brussels, while one standoff has now been put to bed and sorted, another one just isn't going away.
Finally, a bit of good news for Brussels. After weeks of uncertainty, EU leaders have clinched a deal to unlock a historic $2.2 trillion budget and COVID recovery package, paving the way for funds to start flowing to pandemic-battered economies. European Council President Charles Michel said in a tweet, "Now we can start with the implementation and build back our economies." The spending package was first agreed to in July, but Hungary and Poland threatened to torpedo the agreement after a new mechanism linking EU funds to upholding democracy was introduced, outraging the remaining 25 member states eager to kickstart a pandemic recovery. Under the deal, the mechanism remains, but the European Court of Justice will have the last say on any alleged breaches, ultimately delaying penalties. EU leaders also signed off on a list of priorities for a reset in the transatlantic relationship once U.S. President-elect Joe Biden takes office on January 20th. But hanging like a dark cloud over the council building, Brexit, only added to the official agenda at the 11th hour. Leaders meeting as UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson told Britons to prepare for a no deal.
There's now a strong possibility that we will have a solution that's much more like an Australian relationship with the EU.
An Australian-style deal, code for no deal at all, with trade reverting to World Trade Organization rules, tariffs and quotas returning for the first time in decades. Johnson's warning came just hours after Brussels fired off contingency plans of its own to keep planes flying and trucks hauling if both sides fail to strike a deal by the end of the year.
We are willing to grant access to the single market to our British friends. It's the largest single market in the world, but the conditions have to be fair.
The Brexit chief negotiators were back around the table on Thursday, trying to punch through a weeks-long stalemate on other outstanding issues. The new deadline for trade talks is now Sunday, when Brussels and Downing Street will assess what progress has been made and decide what steps to take next. Time, though, is running out to clinch a deal with just 3 weeks left before the Brexit transition period expires, ushering in a whole new EU-UK relationship, trade deal or not. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Last story in the segment coming from South Africa. Townships in that country have always been a hive for entrepreneurial activity, but the oversaturation of certain sectors has affected the chances of these SME success. Big shopping malls and fashion stores also tend to draw dwellers out of the township, making it much more difficult for smaller local enterprises to compete. But tonight, CGTN's Sumitra Naidu is exploring how the COVID-19 lockdown in South Africa created some unexpected opportunities for local traders in South Africa's townships.
Khagiso Letokoto manages a small business called Kasi Convenience. The distribution business has been running for a year now, servicing the township fast food market in Soweto. But it was the lockdown that helped Kasi Convenience become a household name.
You've got a lot of people that work in the townships work outside of the township, right, in town, Sandton, wherever. So all those people came back, they were at home. So in a sense, you had all that buying power concentrated in the townships. For me, it's a phenomenon that the townships themselves have never encountered before. Because of it improved the economy of the township to have that rand circulating within the township.
With everyone stuck at home, Kasi Convenience became just that, a convenient door-to-door delivery service just a phone call away.
It improved our sales. After the lockdown on the 23rd of March, we then came back online early May, and of course we started slow just to assess whether there's business out there. In no time, we were back to big numbers, volumes of orders that we were pushing before. And it was remarkable to witness that. Our business quickly went back to the level of volumes that, I think were impressive. In fact, for me, I wish the lockdown could just be prolonged.
Soweto is one of the largest townships in Africa with a population of 1.6 million. Street food is part of the culture and is a booming market.
At the moment, we cover two categories, being your kota segment which is your tuck shops that sell your bunny chows, and your flame grilled segment. There's your chicken dust, we call them chicken dust here in the townships. They basically sell your grilled chickens. We try to cover a wide range of products. We've got your charcoal, we've got your briquettes, got maize meal.
COVID has been so hard for so many, but Letokoto and his team found a way to make it work for them. Kasi Convenience was started to help people social distance and stay safe. Today, the township business is thriving. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Soweto, South Africa.
And I'll leave it there for the time being. I'm back at the top of the hour, though. We're looking at MTN. It and all other telcos in Nigeria have suspended the sales of SIM cards in the country. The government says it needs to start an audit of the subscriber database. But what exactly is the end goal here? We'll have some answers for you live from Abuja at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Beatrice.
Ramah, thank you. And we still have more news for you here on Current Affairs. Here's what's ahead. South Africa hip-hop artist Rouge uses rap music to tackle gender-based violence.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Female hip-hop artists in South Africa are using their voices to change the violence associated with the genre and address social issues. In the process, Rouge is one of them. She has used rap music to tackle gender-based violence. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
Hip-hop music has a huge following among young people around the world. However, many of the lyrics are filled with profanities while glorifying crime, violence, drugs and misogyny. That culture needs to change, according to South African rapper Rouge.
Hip-hop culture, especially in terms of where it came from, there was a lot of conversation in terms of degrading women, you know, in the music space. And that's a lot of what kids were listening to. That's a lot of what kids would try to implement in their lives. But I do feel that there is a shift that's happening, especially where so many women are joining this hip-hop space, meaning the conversation is changing, meaning now we are stirring the conversation in terms of how we want to be treated.
Rouge feels the industry itself is hostile towards women.
Being a woman is not a positive. It's a negative, and especially for me, it has played a lot of roles in terms of even just trying to get into the hip-hop space in the industry. A lot of things were expected. A lot of sexual favors were expected at times. A lot of people watching me perform, not watching me perform, but rather looking at my body, at my shape. Am I pretty enough? Is my makeup right? Is things that my male counterparts don't have to worry about.
The rapper uses her music to uplift and inspire females and to include men in the conversation. She recently collaborated with fellow artist Amanda Black. The duo redid an old struggle song, Sinseni Na, which asks, what have we done as women to deserve the hatred?
When we did the research in terms of who is my market, a good 70% of my market is males. And that was something that I knew I could use to my strength, which is being able to speak to the men of South Africa, seeing at the fact that they are the problem with this gender-based violence, and that is just 100% the truth. And that's why I decided to release the song.
Rouge is one of a handful of female hip-hop artists in an industry still skewed towards men. She hopes her voice will help change perceptions and reverse the cycle of harassment and violence towards women. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg.